In this episode of B.Hooked Crochet, I've teamed up with Yarnspirations to bring you a messy bun hat. My name is Brittany and I'll be your guide throughout this tutorial. For a supplies list and the written instructions, please visit bhookedcrochet.com/messybunhat. Let's get started right after this. We're going to be working our hats from the band upward. So we're going to start off by creating the band, and it's going to be a ribbing pattern. So we're just going to start off with a slip knot. And now we want to chain 9. Now for our band, we're going to be working with a half double crochet stitch in order to create our ribbing. So what we want to do is locate our third chain from the hook. So we have our first chain, second chain, and third chain. Now I like to work my stitches in the back bump of each one of those chains. So you can see that here. And then you can count from here too. So this is the first chain, second chain, third chain. So I'm just going to hold on to that with my fingers, and we'll make a half double crochet into that third chain. And then we're just going to repeat that for each of our remaining chains. This is what your work should look like at the end of row 1 of our band. And our band is a really simple repeat. So what we're going to do to build upon this is we will chain 2. And our chains are counting as stitches. That's not always the case, but for this pattern, our starting chains do count as a stitch. So we've made our chains, we'll turn our work, and we'll locate the next stitch. So this first stitch right here is where the chain is coming from. So we don't want to work any more stitches into that space, because if we do, we'll increase because our starting chain is counting as a stitch. So we're just going to skip that first one. We're going to work into the next stitch, but we're just going to be working in the back loop only. So this loop right here, that's going to help us to create our ribbing pattern. So we'll half double crochet in that next stitch, and then we'll repeat that until we get to the end of the row. Now when you reach the end of the row, it's important to keep track of what you have going on here, because it's really easy to decrease your stitch. What we'll do is we'll make a half double crochet into our last stitch, so this last V that we can see. But if we were to stop here, then we would be short a stitch, and if we did that every single row, our band would just continue to get smaller and smaller as you progress. So since our starting chain is counting as a stitch, we want to make sure we make a half double crochet in that starting chain, and you can see it right here. If you're having problems viewing your starting chain, then I recommend placing a stitch marker in it, and that way it will help you see where you're supposed to work the last stitch of every row. Another little tip is to count your stitches either as you go or at the end of every row. You want to have a total of 8 stitches, including your turning chain. So to start off our third row, we'll chain 2 and turn our work and find the next stitch. So whenever your pattern says something like that, half double crochet in the next stitch, then you know that this starting chain is not going, that it is counting as a stitch, and that you do not want to work in this first stitch. So we'll locate the next stitch, half double crochet in the back loop, and so that is 2 stitches that we have, because our starting chain is 1, the half double crochet that we just made was 2, and we'll just continue across the row. And what I have here is 6 half double crochets. I have 1 stitch left to work into, so I'll work that in the back loop. And then I need to half double crochet in the turning chain. Now what I usually do on these turning chains, if you turn it over, you can see the V of that chain. So I like to do that, and I am working my half double crochets in this side loop here. So what would appear to be the back loop to keep my pattern consistent. So see how you're working in the back loop, it creates this little ridge right here. If you make your half double crochet in this loop, then you'll still have this loop here to continue that ridge. But if you were to half double crochet in this, it would somewhat break up your pattern. It's not a huge deal, but consistency and these sorts of details are really what makes your work stand out and makes them more professional. So that is our simple pattern repeat for the band. What we've done here is we have made 3 rows, and you can count them pretty easily. So this is row 1, and this is row 2 and row 3, and then you're just going to continue building upon your band until you have a total of 40 rows. So just like we have demonstrated in the video, you'll just make your half double crochet in the back loop only for every single row. Do that for 40 rows, and then come back to the tutorial and we'll join the band at the ends. So right now we're making it lengthwise, and then we'll join it, and then we'll start on the body of our hats. So once you've made it through your 40 rows of the band, it should look something like this. And to join it together, all we're going to do is fold it in half, and then we're going to turn it so that we're crocheting, of course, in the right direction. So I'm going to be starting from this side here, and I'm just going to hold on to the working yarn there in the back, and I want to find, so on this side we're starting off with our turning chain. So I just want to find the top loop. Now I'm going to be working in the back loop. That's going to help maintain the pattern, and just slip stitch. Now it's really important that we keep the stitches aligned. We have 8 stitches in our band, and so we want to have 8 slip stitches to secure it together. So I worked in that top turning chain, and what I want to do is just align them so that the next stitch on the side that's closest to me is next, or right across from the next stitch. So I'm not going to work into this stitch right here, because remember of how we have to start in the next stitch rather than the stitch where our slip stitch is coming from, or our turning chain in previous rows. So when I'm working on this side, I want to work in the front loop and then pair that with the back loop on the other side of the band, and then just slip stitch that together. Work in the front loop on this side, the back loop on the other, and slip stitch. And you want to make your slip stitches relatively loose to help keep the shaping in order. So I just like to pull up before I pull it through the loop on my hook. And that tends to keep it loose enough to make a nice little braided edge here. Now if you've been doing everything correctly, you'll have 2 stitches remaining. On this front side you'll have a stitch and a turning chain, and on the back side you'll have 2 stitches left to work into. And that's all there is to stitching our bands together. And if you straighten it out, the slip stitch really helps to mimic the design in the rest of our band. So now let's get started on round 1 of our hat. Whenever you transition from rows to rounds, it's always a good idea to have a foundation of single crochet stitches, and that's just going to make sure your work looks a lot neater and a little bit more professional. So we're going to do that with the first round of our hat, and we want to make a chain 1. So I've just made a chain there. We're not counting that as a stitch, we're just using it as a turning chain. And what we want to focus on is each one of our rows. So we had a total of 40 rows, so that means we need to have a total of 40 single crochets for round 1. What we want to locate first is the turning chain for our first row here. And just insert your hook underneath that chain and make a single crochet. Then you'll look over to the next row. You'll find that stitch here on the side, our half double crochet. And then you'll just place your hook underneath the stitch and work a single crochet around it. When you're making your single crochets, you want to make sure you're making them a little bit more loose than normal, because we don't want this round to impact the shaping of our hat. If you make your single crochets too tight, then your work will kind of pucker in like this and it will make it too small. But if you make them too big, then it might have a tendency to bow out this way and then the hat will be too big. So you really want to take it slow for this first round and focus on your tension. So locate your next row. We have a turning chain now, which you can see here. Just insert your hook under the chain, make a loose single crochet. It's always a good idea to keep track of your number of stitches as you go. That's going to help you make sure you have the right number of stitches. Locate your next stitch and single crochet. And we're just going to repeat this around. Once you get to the other side, you want to make sure you have a total of 40 stitches and making 1 stitch in the side of every single row. When you've made it back around, your 40th stitch should be in that last loop, and this right here was my starting chain. So remember, we said that wasn't going to count as a stitch, so we don't want to join it there. If we do, we'll end up with 41 stitches, and that's not what we want. So we'll find our first stitch, our first single crochet stitch, and slip stitch there to finish off round 1. The first thing we need to do to start round 3 is we need to change the positioning of where our hook is. So right now we're working in this stitch here. This is where we made our slip stitch. we need to start off row around 3 in this next stitch here. So all we're going to do is insert our hook into that next stitch and slip stitch. And this is going to get us in the right position, so that way when we work back in the other direction, we've made it around here. We have all of our clusters evenly distributed around our round here. So we're going to begin our cluster stitch by chaining 2. And that's not going to count as anything right now. It's just going to help us get up to the correct height for the double crochet cluster. So we're going to yarn over, insert our hook into the same stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, then yarn over and pull through 2. So now we have 1 partial double crochet on our hook. We want to repeat that 2 more times, so we have a total of 3. Now that will leave us with a total of 4 loops on our hook, and when we've reached that, we will yarn over and pull through all 4. Then to finish off the stitch, we need to make a chain, and that completes our cluster. We're going to be alternating stitches, so we've made a stitch here, so we're going to skip the next one and work the cluster into the next. But in order for us to not decrease our stitch count, it's really tempting not to count a chain as a stitch, but it really is. So we need to chain 1 again, since we're skipping the next stitch. That's going to maintain our stitch count and make sure our hats fit properly too. So we'll make a double crochet cluster into the next stitch. So I'm skipping this one here and working into this one. And we want to have a total of 3 double crochets or partial double crochets to each cluster. So I have 3 here, 4 loops on my hook, then yarn over and pull through all 4, chain 1 to finish the cluster, and chain 1 so I can skip the next stitch and work a cluster into the next. And this is the repeat for this round. You just want to continue alternating double crochet clusters and chain stitches until you've reached the other side. So if you've been doing everything correctly, once you made it around, you should be able to skip 1 stitch and work your cluster into the next and have another stitch that's open that would be skipped to maintain the pattern. Now once you've finished up that last cluster, we're going to join with a slip stitch to this first cluster. And I like to join right here. So technically this chain 1 finished off our cluster. So that's normally where we would join, but I feel like you get a little bit more of a better appearance if you join just right here, join with a slip stitch. There are a couple of different options to this pattern. If you have decided to make a solid hat, then you'll just disregard what I'm about to show you. I'm going to show you how to change colors to add that contrasting or that accent stripe in the hat. So if you are not using a contrasting color, then what you're going to do is make a slip stitch into this chain. So what we're doing is we are getting our work in the right spot, and then you'll slip stitch into the chain 1 space because we need to start off round 3 in a chain 1 space. From here, all you would do is proceed by making your first cluster. So you'll chain 2 and then work your cluster. So this is exactly the same as the previous round. Then you would chain 1, you would skip your cluster and work your next cluster in this chain 1 space. And that's what you would do all the way around. Now I'm going to demonstrate what to do if you are using a contrasting color. So the first thing that you want to do is fasten off, and then just pull that loop through the loop on your hook. Then you're just going to grab your contrasting color, make a slip knot, and then place your hook through the gap that's right after where you just fastened off. Place that loop on your hook and then chain 2. Now we'll just work on our first cluster. So this part again is a repeat from the previous round. I just wanted to demonstrate that color transition for you. And then of course chain 1, and then you're going to skip over that cluster and then work your next double crochet cluster in that next chain 1 space. And so this is your repeat now. You'll just do this until we've reached the other side of the round, and I'll demonstrate how to fasten off again so we can switch back to our main color. So once you've finished off your round and you've made it all the way back to your first stitch, we're going to join in that same place. So not the chain 1, but just next to it. Now this is actually the third chain from, or the second chain rather, from where we sort of chain up here. And typically when you're making these clusters, you would allow that chain 2 to act as part of your cluster, so then you would only have 2 double crochets that you would add to it. But I've tried it both ways, and I find that having this extra little section really helps to fill out the space. If you just use your chain 2 and then add two double crochets to your cluster, then it ends up being smaller than the others. And so I found that when you add the chain 3, even though it is wider than the rest, it looks better than the alternative. So if you are not using the contrasting color, so you finished off your round in the same first color that we used, you'll just do the same as you just did before. You'll make a slip stitch into this chain, and then you'll slip stitch into this space to set yourself up for the next round. But for those of us who are using a contrasting color, we're going to fasten off again. And we're going to start off in this space here, so right next to where we ended. We'll make a slip knot, pull it through, chain 2, and then start your cluster. With round 4, we're going to start decreasing our hats. So what we want to do is we made our first double crochet cluster. We're still going to chain 1 in between so that we can skip. We want to do that 2 more times. So the objective here is to have 3 clusters in between each one of our decreases. So that's our first one. Make a cluster in your next gap space. And then again in the next. And now we're going to decrease over the next 2. So I'll demonstrate that now. You'll work the first one as you normally would. But you'll stop right here. We would normally yarn over and pull through all 4. But since we want to turn these 2 spaces into 1 stitch, we're going to go ahead and just jump over to the next gap space and work our second cluster. So once you have 3 partial double crochets on one and 3 on the other, you'll have a total of 7 loops on your hook. Then you can yarn over and pull through all 7 of those loops. Chain 1 to finish it off, and then chain 1 again. Now we'll just shift over and we'll do 1 cluster into each of the next 3 gap spaces. And that's our repeat. We'll do 3 double crochet clusters and then decrease. When you've made it to the end of your round, your last 2 spaces there should be a decrease. Then you'll chain 1 in between, and then we're ready to join in that same place. So join with a slip stitch. And you should have a total of 4 decreases made now at this point. For round 5, we're going to decrease again, but we're going to do so in a different increment. The first thing that we need to do is get our hooks in the proper position. So we want to make a slip stitch into the chain of that cluster below, and then slip stitch again in this chain 1 space. Now from here we can start that first cluster, chain 2 before, this time, instead of making 3 clusters in between each one of the decreases, we're just going to do 2. So we have our first one here, we'll make another one, and then we'll decrease over these 2. Okay, so I have my second cluster, chain 1 in between, and then decrease over these 2. And this is the same way, same method as the previous round. We're just changing up the frequency. So I have my first one there, then work the next. And that's our repeat for the round. Go ahead and do 2 clusters and then decrease and work that until you reach the end of your round. At the end of the round again, your last 2 is going to be a decrease. So you'll make your chain 1 and you'll join in that same place that we have been. Join with the slip stitch. Now we just have 2 more rounds left to go. We're going to decrease on round 7 again. At this point we just have 2 more rounds to go. We're going to decrease again for round 6, and we need to start off in the proper place. So we'll slip stitch again in that chain 1, and then we'll slip stitch into the chain space. Now we'll start off exactly the same, and the only difference with this round is that we are again changing the frequency of when we create a decrease. So in the last round we decreased every 2. This time we're going to decrease every other. So this is our first one. We'll chain 1 and then we'll decrease over these next 2. And that is our pattern repeat for round 6. We're going to make a cluster and then decrease, make a cluster and then decrease. So go ahead and finish that up, and then we'll talk about what to do for our last round. So at the end of round 6 we again have a total of 4 decreases. We'll join with a slip stitch to our first cluster here. And now we're ready to begin round 7, which is the last round in our pattern, and it's just to clean things up. So we have these chain 1 spaces, and they're kind of, you know, they create little gaps and just make it a little less neat. So what we're going to do is stop with a single crochet border. So we're going to make a chain 1, and then we want to single crochet in that chain 1 space, and then single crochet into the chain 1 gap space. Then we'll single crochet into the chain 1 space, and single crochet into the next chain 1 gap space. And that's our repeat for our 7th and final round. When you've made it to the end of your round, you should have a total of 16 stitches, and then just locate your chain. So if you're having trouble, then you can just redo the round and place a stitch marker in that first chain. We're going to join with a slip stitch to that first chain. Now we can fasten off. And then all that's left to do is weave in our ends on the wrong side of our hat. So you'll just flip it inside out. If you have these color changes, as I do, if you use the accent, then you'll just of course want to make sure you're weaving them in with a color that they coordinate. If not, then you should just have your end down here where you started, and then your end up here where you just fastened off.
This concludes our tutorial for the Messy Bun Hat, brought to you by B.Hooked Crochet and Yarnspirations.com. The link to get the supplies list and the written instructions one more time is bhookedcrochet.com/messybunhat. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you like it, please share it with one of your friends or a coworker, and click the subscribe button on this channel. That way you can see future video tutorials from me. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.